Well, we're headed out for a beach walk this morning. Beautiful day so far. I got up this morning, not a cloud in the sky. I was going to take the drone and go do a time-lapse sunrise. And just as it started to get light, it was just solid clouds out where the sun would have come up. So that didn't happen, and those passed, and I know it's absolutely beautiful again. That's just, whoa.
There's our boat.
There's a nice boat. There's also another one. Oh, he was in. He came out. I guess it was too expensive to dock at French Leaf. Because he, oh no, there is another one in there. Yeah, it's a smaller model.
Yeah.
So, oh, what was I going to tell you? Goodness. Having a brain cramp. Okay, I remember now.
Get out of the road.
I don't know. I think people on boats aren't used to being on land, and something happens. That's not what I was going to talk to you about, but I think something happens and they forget there are other humans because they're used to being by themselves on their boat. But anyway, I was going to talk to you about damn, forgot again. Okay, all right, here we go. I got it now. Everybody, you know, I got a lot of comments on the vlog I put up about coffee production, and I'm actually going to put up another one today that, you know, shows you, because, you know, I'm pretty convinced that probably at least, if not more, 95% of people don't fully understand what goes into, you know, making a cup of coffee and the different processes and why it tastes the way it does or doesn't taste the way it is. And, you know, I'm still drastically learning. This is a new thing, and, you know, I'm really leery of...
It's not new. You've always known you like coffee.
Oh yeah, but the whole roasting process, how to do it, which flavors to try to bring out, you know, all that stuff. Yeah, that's all new. Yeah, I've drank coffee for a long time. I think probably since I was 14 or 15. But that's
that
different.
Accounts for your size.
Yeah, that accounts for my size. Don't drink coffee if you're young. It'll inhibit your growth. But look what it does for mental growth. You know, it's an incredibly complicated thing, and one of the other things that, no matter how long I think you do anything, and coffee's just, you know, the thing I'm working on next, you know, nobody, as far as I know, is an expert, and I've always been opposed to that term, because that implies you know everything about it, and as far as I know, there's nobody on this planet who knows everything about everything. They might be really
knowledgeable.
Right, they might be really knowledgeable about what they deal with. Better than some, worse than others. But still.
No, you gotta go.
No, they're good. Full house today. So, I'm really opposed to the expert thing. It's off topic of sorts, but car coming. You can see where the island is just by the clouds. See? No clouds? No clouds? The clouds run on the island. A good beach walk. That cloud is like running up and down the island, and it does that. It must have something to do with the heat or whatever that comes off the landmass of the island, because it does that fairly frequently, where the only cloud around is the cloud right over the island. Everywhere else is clear blue. So I'm going to put up during this video, a video from a place in California that also sells green coffee beans, Sweet Maria's. And if you're interested in coffee, they have quite a few videos about coffee. The stages, visiting, everything that surrounds coffee, testing it. So it's a pretty good resource. I've looked at a lot of their videos, and it's there's a lot of good information there.
I've put together some video clips from my past trips to Ethiopia to explain a little about the details and intricacies of processing in Ethiopia and how it differs from other countries. This footage is from Shakiso, but the pickers are actually from Sidama. They're brought in because there's a labor shortage. A lot of the locals are gold miners. The singing was pretty much for show for the group of visitors. Ethiopia, they not only produce a lot of coffee, and it's the birthplace of coffee, but they roast and drink a lot of coffee themselves in the traditional ceremony. When we say traditional and ceremony, you think it's rare, but this is actually, for many people, a daily occurrence. I'm going to make some comments about the natural coffees, and then we'll look at the wet processing after. But these are hand sorting of the coffee cherries that are picked from the tree and go direct to the beds to dry to produce naturals. The problem with naturals is you don't have the assistance of any machines to help remove underripes or defective fruit. So everything has to be done by hand. In a sense, the fact that hand labor is cheap in Ethiopia is something that we all benefit from. Not everywhere can afford to produce naturals. Those were very fresh cherries from the day before, and here's coffee cherry from several days of drying, still quite wet. It's important to keep a very thin layer of fruit on the bed and to rotate it. But again, these pickers are doing this mainly for show. This wouldn't be their normal labor practice in rotating the coffee cherry. Here the cherries are quite dry and they're forming hard pods, and soon they'll be milled. Naturals are always milled in the local area before they're brought to Addis for export. Now this is the beginning of a wet process where they're doing some pre-sorting and cleaning of the coffee cherries that come in. and the underripes are going to be removed mechanically, more or less. This kind of pre-screening is a little bit rare in Ethiopia. This is a rather technified wet processing mill. This is the pulper, and this is called the kriba, which is a Latin American term for this drum, where the underripe coffee cherry cannot pass through the space within the metal bars and will stay in the interior to be separated. The pulped coffee is washed through to go to the fermentation tank. Pulped means the skin has been removed. And the skins of the coffee fruit are washed out separately. These are returned to the trees in the form of compost. In Ethiopia, there's two types of fermentation. There's dry fermentation, where they drain the water out of the concrete fermentation tank. This is called aerobic fermentation because more oxygen is allowed access to the coffee. But in some areas, coffee is fermented underwater, like the top of this fermentation tank. And you can even see the fermented coffee producing off-gassing. This is called anaerobic fermentation. After the coffee is fermented, which means that the fruity mucilage layer on the outside is broken down, it's agitated. They were agitating in the fermentation tank, which is rare. Most of this happens in the grading channel. The wooden rakes help to loosen any of the residual mucilage, the sticky, fruity layer from the outside of the coffee. But the washing channel also separates heavy coffee from light coffee, since the light coffee floats down the channel first. The dense coffee is pushed against the current back up to the top of the washing channel. Dense coffee will be separated into a different fermentation tank, destined for higher quality lots, whereas the light coffee will go into commercial blends. The coffee is then taken out for the start of the sun drying process on raised beds. Initially it's skin drying, and later as the coffee approaches 10 to 11%, which is the final stage for warehousing it, it's hand-picked pretty much continuously during that time. When the coffee's fully dried, it's bulked up into bags and stored in the warehouse. This resting time is important for it to reach moisture stability and equalization and physical stability. Then the coffee's ready to transport to Addis Ababa to the dry mill. In the dry mills, if it's a wet processed coffee, the parchment skin's removed and it's sorted for color and density and size. And most importantly, it's hand sorted at the end of the process before export. This is a natural coffee, so it would have come to Addis Ababa already peeled out of the husk. But the other steps are very important to homogenize and improve the quality of the coffee and remove the defects. Then it's ready for roasting.
Sid and I were just talking, and you know, roasting coffee is really a complicated thing. Because, you know, when I learned how to be a builder, I researched it, I practiced, I learned more, I practiced. When I, you know, did farming, it was the same thing. When I did website stuff and drone stuff, the point is that you could learn how to do it, and at the end, the person who saw it, you know, if you saw a wall or a house or whatever, if the house came out, you know, the roof was, you know, funny or whatever, or the video was like upside down, or the colors weren't right or something like that, the viewer of that would say, that's wrong. So you had a parameter to work with to say, this is right, this is wrong. And you could make it so that everybody said, yeah, that looks good, that doesn't look good. And you went that route. But with coffee, what happens is, and this has come up a couple times, where there are so many variables to coffee. Not only the roasting it part, because I can take that coffee and I can roast it a certain way. And when I roast it that way, and then when I do it, like I showed you this morning, there was cups there, I can take that exact same coffee and then put it in through like a Bon Mac pour over on top of a cup, or put it in a Chemex, and I can have two totally different, they're both great, but two totally different flavors. Now, if I had stuck that in like a regular, drip coffee pot, I'd probably get another. And that's part of it. So it's what you use. It's also the grind size that you use, the water that you're using. You have all these variables that you roast the coffee, but once it leaves, you have no control over what happens on the consumer's end. So that's a really tough one, because I gave some people, I give away a fair amount of coffee for people to try, and I just put the number on it so they don't know what it is, so they're not biased or anything else like, oh, I had Costa Rican coffee before, that sucks, or whatever. That way they only know the number and they tell me honestly what it is, and to do the coffee the way they normally do. Well, one person wrote me and said that the coffee tasted very generic while it was warm. So I assume that's like, grocery store kind of coffee, it's old, stale, blah, 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 even though this wasn't. Then they said, but when it cooled, oh, it had some really good flavors. So was it the grind? Was it the water? I don't know. Was the water too hot and it scorched it? I don't know how they made it. So that's a really tricky part with coffee, and I don't know how to get around that, because, when I make it and say, okay, I smell some nice spices, or there's a little chocolatey aftertaste or whatever, and you get it, and then it goes, I don't taste any of that. That's a tough one. I really don't know. The only thing I can think of is that you can try to put out videos to show people the different ways, and then, but again, that'll be another video. What's the cost of a good cup of coffee? What you need for equipment and stuff. But you see a wall, looks like a wall. You buy a coffee, and it's supposed to be blah, 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 and then you brew it up, and it's a different one. I don't know how that's going to go. Which then leads me into, is that why most coffee is roasted to a darker level? So that it, as a general rule, no matter what you do with it, it tastes like coffee.